I had two important commitments in North Carolina, job interviews that could change my life. At the time, I lived in New York and decided to drive there instead of flying to save money. My current job was miserable, and these opportunities felt like a promising fresh start. Both positions offered great salaries, amazing benefits, and as a bonus, I could escape New York's harsh weather. I left on Thursday night after a long day at work. Friday was reserved for the interviews, and the plan was to arrive at the hotel in the early hours of the morning. Before hitting the road, I stopped by my house to grab my suitcase and say goodbye to my family. The trip was long, over 8 hours to my destination, with an ETA around 2 a.m. I was heading to a Comfort Inn, a simple hotel to rest before the big day. During the first few miles, I stayed wide awake, fueled by 3 cups of coffee I drank quickly. However, fatigue began to weigh on me. The combination of a sleepless night, anxiety about the interviews, and exhaustion from work made the journey feel grueling. As the hours passed, I felt like a zombie behind the wheel, fighting to stay awake. When I was about 2 hours away, something strange happened. The road was almost deserted, with only a few cars passing occasionally. In an isolated stretch of highway, I saw something that made me question my sanity. A man in a suit standing on the side of the road. He wasn't walking or signaling for help, just standing there, staring directly at my car as I drove by. I felt a chill. I could swear his head turned to follow my car with his eyes. I muttered, "What the hell?" For a brief moment, I thought about turning back to check if he needed help, but I dismissed the idea. It was too late, and the situation felt surreal. My mind started inventing explanations. Maybe he had fought with someone and been left behind. Maybe he was just a lost traveler. It was all to keep my brain busy because sleep was beginning to overpower me. However, about 10 minutes later, I saw another man on the side of the road. He was also wearing a suit, standing still, just like the first. I was even more confused. Were they the same person? What was going on? I decided to slow down and, almost without thinking, pulled over. My intention was to ask if he was okay. However, as I glanced in the rearview mirror, he was no longer there. There was no one. My heart raced, and I immediately got back on the road. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. I decided to stop at the next rest area. There, I bought more coffee and parked for a few minutes to collect myself. As I sipped, I looked around and saw something that froze me in place. Under a light post, the man in the suit was there again. This time, I saw his face more clearly, a middle-aged white man with short, dark brown hair, clean-shaven. His face had a neutral but unsettling expression, and once again, he was staring directly at my car. Fear took over. I started the engine and drove away without hesitation, trying not to look back. Despite the coffee, I was still losing the battle against sleep. I decided to stop in an empty parking lot and try to rest. Reclining my seat, I closed my eyes, but fear of seeing that man again wouldn't let me relax. Every small noise made me open my eyes in terror. After a while, I scanned around the car to ensure I was alone. Everything seemed fine until I looked in the rear-view mirror. For a brief moment, I saw someone sitting in the back seat. It was him. I screamed and stumbled out of the car, falling to the ground. When I looked again, the seat was empty. My breathing was heavy, and my heart was pounding. I convinced myself it was all just hallucinations caused by exhaustion. I got back into the car, still trembling, finished the coffee, and pushed through the rest of the drive. Despite the fear, I finally arrived at the hotel around 3 a.m. exhausted. I collapsed into bed and fell asleep immediately. The next morning, my first interview was at 11 a.m. Although I wasn't completely rested, I felt slightly better. However, when I met my interviewer, I froze. He looked exactly like the man in the suit I had seen during the night. My discomfort was obvious, and it negatively affected my performance. I was so nervous that it felt like I was in a dream. Later, during my second interview, things went much better. The interviewer was a woman, and I managed to focus. I ended up getting the job and moved to North Carolina. Today, I still work there and love what I do. My therapist later explained that stress, anxiety, and sleep deprivation likely caused the hallucinations. According to her, my brain projected the man in the suit because I was subconsciously imagining what my interviewer might look like. While that explanation makes sense, it doesn't erase how terrifying the experience was. It was the most terrifying and horrific night of my life, something that still gives me chills. I'm 28 years old, and my boyfriend Todd lives in another state. We usually take turns visiting each other, but I often visit him more since he has his own place, while I still live with my sister as a roommate. I was visiting him for a week during winter break since I'm a teacher and had time off. I packed a lot for the trip and took my old 2009 Hyundai Sonata, which I bought for my sister. I knew the car wasn't great for snowy conditions, and in the northern area where Todd lives, the roads were already covered in snow. It was late, and the snow started falling heavily. There were blizzard warnings, but Todd and I thought it was better to face the road that night rather than deal with even worse conditions the next day. However, the snow became unbearable, and I realized I wouldn't make it. I stopped at a small roadside diner to eat something and figure out where to stay. I ordered a sandwich and coffee, and the waitress told me it wasn't safe to keep driving. She suggested some nearby hotels and motels. As I finished eating, a man sitting at the bar turned his chair and told me about a motel just up the road. He seemed to have overheard my conversation with the waitress. He said it was cheap and perfect for a quick stay. He introduced himself as Toby, but I gave a fake name and said I was Michelle. Toby kept half-facing me during the time I was there, but I avoided further conversation. After paying, I left the diner. The snow had accumulated during the time I spent there, making driving even more difficult. I slowly drove to the motel, which looked simple but suitable. At the front desk, I paid about $50 for a ground floor room. The room was small, with outdated decor, a queen bed, and red carpet, but it was enough for the night. I tried to FaceTime Todd, but there was no signal. I decided to get the Wi-Fi password from the front desk. On my way, I noticed a new car in the parking lot and saw someone sitting inside. I didn't think much of it. The receptionist gave me the password, and I returned to my room. I called Todd, but the connection was poor, so we resorted to texting. As we chatted, I heard a noise coming from the bathroom. I leaned forward and noticed the door was shut. I couldn't remember if I had left it that way. Panic set in as I realized I had left the room earlier without locking the door. Todd suggested I check if the door locked automatically. I put on my shoes and opened the door. That's when I saw footprints in the snow leading from a car in the parking lot to my door. The car was now empty. Terrified, I ran back to the front desk and told the receptionist about the intruder. While he made a call in another language, I noticed Toby leaving my room and walking to his car. He looked directly at me before driving off. The receptionist's friend soon arrived, a big man who didn't speak English. They helped me move to a new room. Todd offered to come to me, but I didn't want him driving in dangerous conditions. The next morning, the roads were clear enough for me to finish the trip to Todd's house. Looking back, I dislike how the receptionist avoided calling the police, likely to protect the motel's reputation. I later called the diner to warn them about Toby. Since that night, I've completely lost trust in strangers. On that cold December night, I was driving along a deserted road in northern Minnesota. It was a remote area, surrounded by dense forests and small lakes that froze over during winter. I was on my way to meet my best friend, Ryan, at his fishing cabin. He had insisted I spend the weekend with him, away from the rush of the city. The idea of relaxing in a cozy cabin sounded tempting, but what happened that night is forever etched in my memory. I had been driving for nearly 5 hours. The snow was light at first, but it quickly turned into a heavy storm, making visibility almost non-existent. My GPS stopped working as soon as I entered an area without signal, but Ryan had given me detailed directions. Still, the roads all looked the same, and I began to wonder if I had taken a wrong turn. After about 30 minutes without seeing another soul or any signs of civilization, I spotted a cabin in the distance, with faint lights glowing on its porch. Relieved, I thought it must be Ryan's place. I parked my car out front and ran to the door to escape the biting cold. I knocked a few times, but no one answered. I tried calling Ryan, but of course, there was no signal. That's when I noticed the cabin door was slightly ajar. Against my better judgment, I decided to go in. The interior was warm and seemed abandoned, but not messy. There was a folded blanket on the sofa, an unlit fireplace, and a mug of tea sitting on a table by a chair. Someone had been there recently. A strange chill ran down my spine, but I convinced myself it was just the wind and my exhaustion playing tricks on me. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps coming from upstairs. Frozen with fear, I stared at the staircase, expecting Ryan to come down, but no one appeared. I called out, "Ryan, are you there?" Nothing. Only the sound of the wind outside and the creaking of the old wood. Before I could decide what to do, the cabin door slammed shut with a loud bang. I ran to open it, but it was locked from the inside. Panic started to set in. I grabbed my phone, but I still had no signal. That's when I heard something even more unsettling, a low, muffled laugh coming from upstairs. My entire body froze. With trembling legs, I began to climb the stairs slowly. Each step creaked, as if screaming for me to turn back. At the top, I saw a short hallway with a single closed door at the end. The laughter had stopped, but now I could hear something dragging on the other side of that door. My instincts told me to run, but something compelled me to continue. When I turned the doorknob, I realized it was locked. I shoved my shoulder against the door, and it burst open with a loud crash. The room was empty, except for a rocking chair facing the window. It was moving slowly, as if someone had just gotten up. Before I could react, I heard the cabin door open downstairs and quick footsteps echoing across the floor. I ran down the stairs, but what I saw made me freeze. The door was open, and outside in the fresh snow, there was a trail of footprints leading toward the frozen lake. Large human footprints, but that wasn't all. Beside them was another trail, as if something had been dragged along. Hypnotized, I followed the footprints to the edge of the lake. The ice reflected the faint light of the moon, but in the middle of the lake stood something that took my breath away. A tall figure, draped in a black cloak that almost touched the ground. It was standing still, staring directly at me, even from such a great distance. An inexplicable fear gripped me, as if the air around me was being sucked away. Without a second thought, I ran back to the cabin, locking the door and hiding in the farthest corner. My breathing was shallow, and my heart felt like it would explode. I glanced out the window, but the figure on the lake was gone. Only the footprints in the snow remained. I couldn't sleep that night. As soon as the sun rose, I grabbed my things and ran to my car. Ryan never showed up, and when I finally reached him the next day, he swore he had never left his house because the snowstorm had trapped him. To this day, I don't know who or what that figure on the lake was. I only know I never went back to that road or that cabin. Some things are better left in the past.